Hello, everybody. This is a graphing review. That is usually chapter 3 in our notebook. Let's talk about graphing. One of the first things we did was we talked about surveys where you ask questions. Here's some questions that you could consider. Why do we do surveys? And in the jot notes, you could write something like, obviously to answer questions. Maybe you want to gain some information. Maybe you want to do some planning, things like that. And then sometimes they might ask you about different trends that you see in a graph. You might say, like, what's the most popular or least popular? And you can also try to give an explanation as to why you think something's popular or not popular. Here's a very interesting one. I'm going to zoom in a little bit for this. And this has to do with, can you take this survey result and apply it to a new group? Let's pretend I asked a whole bunch of grade 4 girls some questions. And I wanted to know, I got the results. Could I then use that information to do some planning about all grade 4 students? Well, I would say probably yes. I mean, I can't maybe ask everybody, but if I ask the girls, then the information should be good for everybody, the boys and the girls. Now, would it work with a kindergarten group? Well, probably not, because what the grade 4 is like, or the information I get from the grade 4s, probably won't help me with the kindergartens because there's a big age difference. And what about adults? Could I use this information to help me make a decision about adults? I would say no. If I want information, if I'm going to do some work with adults or make some planning about something to do with adults, I wouldn't be asking grade 4 girls. So you can use the information and go to other groups if it's a similar age group. But if you go to a really big difference, then usually you can't use that information anymore. Okay, so let's take a look at this kind of survey here, which is what is your favorite sport? And we've got different numbers here. And if this was in color, you could figure out that this was hockey and this was soccer, etc. But what are some other related questions that you could ask? Because this is about favorite sport, you have to then do related questions, which could be, maybe you can ask favorite winter sport, or favorite team sport, or individual sport, or something like that. Or would you rather do a sport versus some schoolwork? I know everyone would pick schoolwork, of course. But these are all related questions because they also have to do with sports, but there's something different. I can take this information and ask other questions about that. Let's talk about graphs in general. If you were going to have a complete graph, what are some of the things that you might add to that? Now, I gave 5 lines here. Let's try to think of some things that a graph will need. This is the one thing that most people forget, that you're going to need to do a title on there. You often need to do labels, and you should label the x-axis and the y-axis. And in a graph, this is the y-axis and this is the x-axis. It's awesome if you can add some color to the graph. Label the axes, some color, and I'm not sure if I can think of anything else or not. If I do, I can come back to it. But definitely a title up here and labeling here would be good. Some color inside there and some bars or lines or whatever it is you're doing. Now, let's talk about what are the steps when you're building a graph and you have the y-axis and then you've got the scale that goes from the top to the bottom. How do you figure out what that is? This is usually what I do is I look at the data and I look and I find the range. The range is usually the high number to the low number. I look at the high number, and then from the high number, I go to a round number that is greater than the high number. So, for example, if the range is 3 to 97, well, I look at the high number, and I'm going to round up to maybe 100. If the range was from 6 to 159, maybe what I'll do is I will look at the high number, and I will go up to 200. Now, once you've identified what the biggest number is, then you can divide that by 10, and that gives you what you're counting by. So when you do your scale, if you're going to 100, 100 divided by 10 is 10, so it'll be 10, 20, 30, 40, and that kind of gives you what the scale is. So again, look at the data, find the range. Really concentrate on the high number. When you get that high number, round that number to a number that's a little bit higher, for 97 to be 100, etc. And then once you have the big number, the scale you're going to use, then you know you can figure out what you're counting by. For example, for 100, I'll count by 10s, and for 200, I'll count by 20s, and that will tell me what all the little steps are going to be. For grade 5s, one of the things they have to do is do a broken line graph. Broken line graph, instead of a line graph, we use a broken line graph. It looks obviously like this, a dashed line, and we do that when we don't know the values in between points. So we do a broken line to indicate that, well, we have some of the data at these points. We don't really know what's happening in between. Now, this data, usually for the broken line graph, we've been using temperature, and we're going to use, there's months here, and that is usually, obviously, it's 12 months. So we've been using a 14 by 14 grid for that so that we have enough. Now, because it's going to be a line graph, we need to really mark off the months on the lines, not a bar graph we would use in between, but we'll do a line graph. So let's go January, February, March, April, May, etc., etc. Now again, to do my scale, I'm looking at the range. The low number is 1, and the high number is 35. So if I round up to a round number, I'm probably going to get, let's say, I want my top of my scale to be around 50. That means I'm counting by 5. So 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and again, this is for grade 5s, by the way, etc., etc. And then I start plotting. So in January, it's 1, which would be way down here. In February, it's 3, which would be about halfway to 5. In March, it's 4, again, almost at 5. April suddenly shoots up to 16, which is 15 plus a little bit more. And then March, the temperature goes up to 34, which would be 35. 34 is here. And then with a ruler, not by hand like I'm doing, you would then do a dotted line, something like that. So that is how you do a broken line graph. It often talks about, usually you see questions like, what trends do you see? Well, if this is temperature, I can say, oh, in the winter months, it gets, it's very cold, and it gets warmer towards the summer months. And then, of course, it falls down the other way. So that's kind of the trend that you might see. For grade 4s and 5s, you have to do something similar, but this time we're going to do a bar graph, and that has to do maybe with rainfall. Again, if it's months, I'll give you a 14 by 14 grid so you have enough room, but a lot of times we use a 10 by 10 grid to make it easier. Again, January, February, March. Now, this is, oh, I made a boo-boo already. This is a bar graph, so this whole space here is January. This whole space here is February. This whole space is March, April, May, etc., etc. And again, I'm looking for the range. My range is 0 to 330. So if I round up, I'm probably going to look at using 500 to be the top. And that means I'm counting by 50s. So 0, 50, 100, 150, 200, etc., etc. It goes up. So in January, it's at 0, so I can draw a line there. February is 20, maybe that would be here. And March is 30, that might go here. And in April is 40. Whoa, a lot of rain so far. And then in May, it goes all the way up to 110, which would be here. Now, the important part when you're doing a bar graph really is this line on top to make sure that that line is nice and straight and it's easy to see. And then you would color it in probably properly, maybe with some pencil crayons. It might look something like that. You get the idea. I'm trying to go quickly for this video, but that is how you would do that. Again, what kind of trends do you see? Oh, it's dry in the winter months and it's wet in the summer months, something like that. That's how you would take this kind of data and you could build a bar graph out of it. Here's one of the most difficult concepts of all, and there's a bar graph where you have to make intervals. You do that when you have a whole bunch of data, like you've collected, this is below, is test data out of 50. Now it's hard to graph this as a bar graph because there's so many different values. So what we need to do is we need to make different intervals. And now for intervals, I like to think of the idea of pots. I'm going to draw some pots here. And those pots are all going to hold the data from different intervals of values. Now this goes up to 50, so the range is from 0 to close to 50. 45 looks like the biggest number, so 0 to 45. I like to think of it as I want to make about 5 or 6 pots for all the information to go. Because I'm going up to 45, let's just pretend it's 50. That means that I could have 10 different numbers in one of the pots. So let's say I go from 0 up to 9. Now you're going to want to put a 10 in there, but if you count, 0 to 10 is actually 11 numbers. So 0 to 9 is 9 numbers, actually 10 numbers, sorry. When you count them, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then that's one pot. And then another pot, I'm going to put all the numbers that fall between 10 and 19. And then all the numbers that fall between 20 and 29. Do you see this kind of a pattern here? And 39 and 40 and 49. And I won't do that one. I don't have a 50 value. I'm lucky. So then what I do is, now that I have these pots, I kind of need to make a tally to figure out where the numbers fall. This one, there's a 0 there. 32, that goes here. And 17, that goes here. And et cetera, et cetera. Let's just pretend that it's going to look like this. So then I'm going to end up with bar graphs that look, I'm just making it up, but something like that. We talked about how to make a bar graph. So this is going to be 0 to 9. This is, and that would look something like this. And this is going to be 10 to 19, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I've made a whole separate movie about intervals because they are one of the most toughest thing to do. If you're in grade 4, then this list will be in order for you, and that makes it a little easier to figure out. Basically, again, the important part is that you are looking at the range and then trying to think about 5 or 6 pots that you can do it. If it was out of 50, then that is like 10 in each pot. If it was up to around 100, maybe you do 20 in each pot. And that is the way you do intervals. Let's move along. Here is mean, median, mode, and range. I've got some things that, some statements, and you have to figure out which word goes in there. If you add up all the numbers and then divide by how many numbers you have, is that mean, median, mode, or range? I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm going to go over here to one of the more easier ones. It is the most popular number. In this data set, I've got 3 2s. So when something is popular, that is the mode. And I like to think of a la mode, which means ice cream on the side. And that's very popular with me. So that's how I try to remember that. Let's go to this one. Is the number in the middle? So in this case, I've got 5 numbers. You need to put them in order. And then you can figure out that it's not medium. It's median. Sorry, that's my spelling mistake. It's the median number is the one in between. The difference from the smallest number to largest, well, smallest to largest, that's range. And if you add up all the numbers, then divide by how many numbers you have, that is the mean. So that's how you fill that in. Now, this part here, when I give you a question, you'll be able to use a calculator to add it up and to do dividing. But for these ones here, for the mode, you can just use your eyeballs to figure that one out. But for the median, you have to put them in order from smallest to largest to kind of figure out what you would do. Let's check out this. 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 7. Let's say you have something like this. This is an even number. And here's where the middle is. It's between 4 and 5. So what you do in that case is you split the difference. It will really be 4.5. Another way to do it is you add 4 plus 5. That gives you 9. You divide by 2, and that gives you 4 plus 4.5. That's just what you do if it's in between. So mean, median, and mode for this one. Let's say, what is the median? Median is the number in the middle. So I would do 100, put them in order, 110, 110, then 110, 2 110s, 115, and then 120. So the most popular number is 110. So the mode equals 110. The median is the number in the middle. The median is 110 as well. Now, to do the mean, then, what I have to do is I have to add all these numbers up and divide by 5. So I'm going to let you do that with your calculator and to figure out what the mean is. And it doesn't ask you this time, but the range would be the smallest to the biggest, so it would be 100 to 120. And you could make a graph on there if you want. And this part, I already explained that. For this part here, I answer that question. That's what you write down for this part here. This part here we added, and I call it sneaky scales. And basically is watch out for graphs where the y-axis doesn't start at 0 because, let's just leave that for a second. Take a look at this diagram. I'm going to zoom up so you can see it in full. Here's my daughter, Manisha, and she's saying, hey, I drank way more coffee than you this year. Her and I like to make coffee, so that's one thing we have in common. And here's the data. She drank 40 cups, and I drank 37. And when she graphed it, she's like, look at this, I'm killing you. It is so much more. But I got suspicious. She was trying to be sneaky because she did not start at 0. She started at 36, which is under. So all she's showing is really the top of the graph, and she's using that to say, oh, I really drank more coffee than you. Let's pretend it was a competition. And not a good thing to have a competition about, but so basically the point here is if a graph starts at 36 or it doesn't start at 0 or it starts underneath, this is a good way to show the difference between something. And someone might use it to try to explain, to convince you that, hey, Manisha really did drink so much more. But I kind of think of it as a bit of a sneaky way because it doesn't really show the true value. So watch out for that. You should use a sneaky scale if you're trying to convince somebody and you want to show a big difference. But if someone's trying to convince you, you should watch out for that because I think they're being a little bit sneaky. So watch out for graphs where the y-axis doesn't start at 0 because they exaggerate the differences. And they are kind of sneaky. I'm going to put that in air quotes. So they're good if you want to convince somebody, but if you're being convinced, you got to be careful that you're making the right decision. Okay, that is it for this marathon video. Talk to you later, boys and girls.